Please welcome Philip Klein, Audrey Fahlberg, Jim Geraghty, and Caroline Downey.
Thank you all for coming. I'm really excited to be here with you. I'm Philip Klein, and I'm editor of National Review Online. We have a lot to discuss, so I'm just going to briefly introduce everyone. First, we have Audrey Fahlberg, who is our politics reporter, our eyes and ears here in Washington. Next to her is Jim Geraghty, our senior political correspondent and author of the Morning Jolt newsletter. And we have Caroline Downey, a staff writer who's done a lot of great investigative work and who you could see regularly doing video commentaries on our YouTube channel. Before we begin, we would like to thank our generous sponsors for this session, Richard and Karen Spencer. Thank you for your support and long-standing commitment to National Review. Also, don't forget there are cards on all of your tables in case you have questions. Just jot them down, and a team member will be coming around to collect the questions. So to start off with, at the beginning of the Trump administration, I was doing my best to try to figure out a unifying way to describe the Trump coalition. And when we talk about the Reagan coalition, we talk about the so-called three-legged stool of social conservatives and economic conservatives and national security conservatives. But that doesn't really fit as a description of Trump. Certainly, there are a lot of conventional Republicans who want to do conventionally Republican things in the Trump administration. But then you also have people like Tulsi Gabbard or RFK Jr., who you wouldn't expect to see in a Mitt Romney administration. And so when I tried to think of what sort of unifying everything, what I felt was that there was this sort of distrust of the institutions and the so-called experts running them. This is something that Matt talked about a bit in the last panel, this idea that people were given this power, the deep state, and they've royally messed things up. And people could have different triggering events for coming to this conclusion. It could date back to the Iraq War and disillusionment over that. It could be over COVID and all the surrounding issues in that. But the overall view is we want to blow stuff up. And basically, what do you think that we're now 2/3 into the first 100 days? What do you think that coalition has gotten out of their support from Trump?
Well, first of all, thank you, Governor Klein. As a precaution on the Ideas Summit, I've just decided I'm going to call everyone on stage governor, foreshadowing some of our other folks. So I think you're correct. The first few months of the Trump administration have all been about blowing stuff up. USAID, Voice of America, the Department of Education, the Houthis, Tesla dealerships. Too soon? The one thing that we were supposed to blow up that hasn't gotten blown up was TikTok. We did pass a law saying we were going to get rid of it, and Trump was like, nah, I don't feel like doing that. So, as a conservative, I find this to be a very mixed bag. My favorite thing that the Trump administration has blown up is this perception that enforcement of immigration laws are optional. And if you don't feel like doing it, you just don't have to do it. You don't have to secure the border and stuff like that. I wrote a column for that other place in Washington across the river that I write for, saying that when Trump did his joint address to Congress, that the one indisputable success that he absolutely deserved all the high fives for was the fact that the sheer number of people attempting to cross the southern border, the line was starting to decline a little bit the last couple of months of Biden, and then Trump takes office and it drops like a stone. And I wrote this, and what I suspect was a cranky old lady wrote to the Post, whatever that place was, and said that, well, the only reason people are no longer trying to cross the border is because Trump has ruined this country and made it so terrible they don't even want to live here anymore. Sure, lady. So that's the upside. The downside is that if you're here, there's a really good chance that you're conservative, which is not a synonym for anarchist. We don't like, big government. But we do think that it has some important duties and that we ought to keep it in place for at least for those vital duties. My attitude is that if you try to tell Trump about Chesterton's fence, the idea that if a fence is there, even if you don't remember why people put it there, it was probably there for a reason, Trump would say, it's a really old fence, and I don't understand why it's there. I don't see it. It's not gold. It's not big. It's not beautiful. We need a big, bigger, beautiful wall, not a little fence. I've had 8 years to work on that impression. And so I would like to have, I totally get, our Jimmy Quinn has done excellent reporting on Voice of America and its steadfast refusal to call Hamas terrorists. If you're not going to call them terrorists, who qualifies, right? And so there's a lot of legitimate gripes there, but I'd much rather have a good Voice of America putting out the American message and countering, foreign disinformation and Russia Today and all the Chinese state-run media than to not have it at all. And right now, it seems like the attitude is we don't want to have a Voice of America. Similarly, with USAID, of course, the let's not have, don't be racist plays in Dublin. Okay, we don't really need to be sponsoring that kind of stuff. But Ebola monitoring in African airports, that seems like a good thing to have. I'd rather have it than not have it. We're coming up on the 5-year anniversary we just passed the 5-year anniversary of the world shutting down for COVID. So it's a mixed bag. A good portion of the people who voted for Trump, they love it. They see nothing worthwhile in Washington and want to see the place razed to the ground. I think those of us who believe in limited government, but not no government, are going to find some of these moves counterproductive or frustrating. Or, I think at one point Elon Musk said his attitude towards firing people is to fire as many as you can, and then if you figure out you did too many, undo it, hire them back. Now that might work in Silicon Valley where computer science and software programming engineers grow on trees. For people whose national security clearance takes like a year or two to get done, they're not going to just come right back the moment you need to hire them again. I have ranted for too long. You should hear from some other people, but that's my nutshell perspective. That's the short version.
So, Caroline, one thing that just watching this I find fascinating is that we're basically almost 10 years from when Trump famously came down the escalator to change American politics forever. And yet the media still can't figure out how to cover him. And they keep on embarrassing themselves and kind of confirming everything he says about fake news. So just this week, we had a couple of stories. In one, there were these sort of salacious headlines about how Trump invited a female congresswoman to his bed and said, "Don't tell Melania." It turns out the congressman, Anna Paulina Luna, was pregnant and suffering symptoms of preeclampsia. And Trump said, "Oh, you could, if you need to lie down, you could use my bed." Her husband was there. He joked, sort of, "Don't tell Melania." And that got blown into this sort of big scandal almost. And then there was something where the AP had to retract a story saying that Tulsi Gabbard said that Trump and Putin were very good friends. Well, it turned out she was talking about the Indian Prime Minister, Modi. Now, Modi and Putin don't exactly sound similar. It's not an easy confusion to make, but somehow they did. And what is it about Trump where the media seems to can't help themselves from stepping on rakes?
I think old habits die hard, and let's remember that Trump's first term was a boon for progressive media because it turns out that rage baiting, and that sometimes included race baiting, MSNBC, Joy Reid, that's very profitable, right? But they can't bank on that resistance audience anymore. A lot of these major networks and publications are hemorrhaging viewers. MSNBC obviously cut Joy Reid because of tanking viewership, also tanking ratings. And so that's been, I think, the difference is that, they can't play the same tricks they did the first time and try to kind of goose and juice their ratings by, preying on whatever the news cycle was with Trump, because it's just not hitting this time around. And I think that means that progressive media is kind of rediscovering the original mission of being a business rather than an ideological machine. And we're seeing this across major networks and publications that are diversifying their voices. The LA Times owner is notably recruiting some conservative writers, and this is same with, I know, at CNN from my limited experience in media, that although it's uncomfortable and they don't like it, they do have more debate panels because they realize that that is where the market is at, and the market still decides in media. So as I said, I think old habits die hard, but they are still attacking Trump, although this time it feels more indirectly, and they're targeting his stand-in. So instead of Trump derangement syndrome, it's Elon derangement syndrome, because I think they understand that Elon, he is, he's kind of he's like when you say, nice wheels, but you really mean nice car. He represents the entire administration, but they also are confronted with the fact that Trump won a mandate. There's Republican trifecta. He won the popular vote and the Electoral College. So they are sensitive to the fact that they can't just rail against Trump the same way they did, in the first term. So Elon is this convenient boogeyman for them to go after, and it's been really rampant. I mean, across the networks, we saw with the Nazi salute that wasn't. Right? This was they had a heyday with this, and a field day, I should say, and they basically made it so that, this guy was accused of, doing the Sieg Heil, even though he's just an awkward tech mogul that has, I think, very excited spasms on stage, and they're doing this while they're conveniently ignoring the anti-Israel protests across this country that literally used Nazi iconography and called for or defended Hamas, which it's one of its explicit goals is the extermination of the Jews, a global intifada. So there was just this incredible contradiction. And another example is with USAID. This was the biggest blow to the country that this little agency involved in foreign aid. They were saying, how dare you, first of all, take an auditing examination to this agency, which is really what Elon Musk he's just advocating for, at the bare minimum, some accounting. And I do think it's very ironic that as they go after Elon with all of their might in legacy media, I think he's probably very frustrated. And he might feel like this Doge project is ultimately in vain because both parties have accepted that we're only trimming on the margins. The waste, fraud, and abuse, it's like the peripheral excess, but the bulk of the fiscal problem, entitlements, will not be touched. And I think Elon, he obviously is a successful, titan of industry. He's a genius, we know that. I think he's looking at the situation and saying, you guys are making me public enemy number one, and I'm literally touching 15% of this problem. Not at all the bulk of it. But with USAID, that was an agency that media coverage never bothered to mention, had been riddled with scandals in the past, had kind of mutated far beyond its original size and scope, and that's a common theme of the media coverage is they're taking an examination of these agencies that have been baked in the system for a very long time. We assume this gravy train would be permanent, and now somebody's shaking that up and how dare you? But once again, they struggled to not be tone deaf to the very electorate that they alienated again, because just from an optics standpoint, Elon Musk taking a fine-tooth comb to waste, fraud, and abuse feels nice for the taxpayer. There's something therapeutic about that because for the longest time they didn't know where their tax dollars were necessarily going. And USAID was just one example, supposed to be focused on war-torn countries struggling with famine, and instead it kind of got involved in all this superficial do-goodery. So that's my lay of the land right now, is that Elon right now is the focus of the media outrage, and I think they're hoping that if they can just and they see that as a vulnerability for Trump as well, because they're besties, they have a bromance, and they're trying so desperately to undercut that little marriage they have going on. But I don't think it's going to work, because I think they're, in a weird way, they're kind of cut from the same cloth. They're like kindred spirits. And I think Trump, obviously loyalty is still his currency, and he does value that above all else. And barring some really big blow up between the two, he defends him like very seriously. So it's so much so that he bought a Tesla to show solidarity with his right-hand man. So I'm not so sure they can break this duo up anytime soon, but that doesn't mean the media won't try to take Elon down as a means to get to the Trump administration.
So, Audrey, one aspect of this we haven't talked about yet is the Democrats. And the Democrats are facing an electorate that seemed to be screaming in this election to start acting more normal, drop the woke stuff, stop indulging the radical elements within your party. However, that's a huge base of their party. And for years now, they've been saying if Trump gets reelected, that's the end of democracy. There won't be another election, and all sorts of inflammatory rhetoric. And a lot of their base believed that. And now they see them acting like Trump's just any other president, and they don't feel like they're getting enough aggressive fight against the Trump administration. So they're frustrated, and Schumer seems to be running for cover. You've been doing a lot of reporting on this on the Hill, so what are you seeing?
Democrats are obviously very divided on strategy in this particular moment. You have one camp of Democrats who believe, like James Carville, who think that they say Republicans are bad at governing, so we just need to sit back and let them and wait for the inevitable implosion. Then there are other Democrats who believe that Democrats need to have a targeted approach and attack specific things that they think are wrong with the Trump agenda. Then you have the progressives and the grassroots who think that you need to fight back against every single thing that Trump is doing. Obviously, they were very thrown off by the reality that Trump carried every single battleground state, after Kamala Harris came in and there was this big honeymoon and it seemed like a really close race. But yeah, look, right now, one of the biggest problems for Democrats is that, as Phil kind of suggested, they're not really able to have a serious postmortem about what went wrong electorally, because the problem is, clearly, as the 2024 election suggested, they have a serious issue with working class voters, particularly on issues like trans athletes, the suburban voters everyone cares about. That's a winning issue for Republicans, that Republicans are on the right side of, the DEI stuff, the woke stuff. But they can't have a postmortem about that because the grassroots will go insane, as Chuck Schumer has seen the past few days, right? So typically with continuing resolutions to fund the government, sorry to put you to sleep early in the morning, I know it's a super exciting topic, but the past couple of years, House Republicans have relied on Democrats to get government funding legislation across the finish line. The problem is this time, Mike Johnson, they didn't really need Democratic votes. One Democrat voted and one Republican voted against. But they were able to kind of get this to the Senate, right? And so Democrats didn't have any leverage. And so after all these House of Democrats had voted against a government funding bill, Schumer says, "Oh, Republicans, you don't have the votes," and then the next day says, "Never mind, we're actually gonna help Republicans clear a filibuster," because he thought that a government shutdown would be a political loser for Democrats, and now he has to pause his book tour for security concerns because he's getting so many protests, from grassroots Democrats who are really, really upset that he's caving to Republicans here. And I think we're going to continue to see this problem over the next few months. Democrats just, it's funny, if you talk to consultant types, they say, the problem isn't the message, it's the messenger. We need to get Democrats on TikTok. We need to change, where they're talking to voters or how they're meeting voters and, how we do town halls. But the problem is clearly there's part of an electoral message that's off kilter here. And Republicans are keenly aware of this. Clearly Democrats are kind of they feel they're taken off kilter right now by just this flood the zone strategy that the Trump administration has taken with so many different executive actions. And I talked to White House Deputy Chief of Staff James Blair about this the other day, and he said, obviously part of the strategy is we just want to do a lot of stuff, so that's why we're just signing so many executive orders and doing so many things, but also we see a strategic imperative to keep Democrats off kilter because, they'll get obsessed with one Musk-related thing, but then we've done 5 different things before they can write a segment about it.
So, Jim, you and I are roughly contemporaries, and I feel like every time after an election, we do this dance where we talk about how the losing party is completely doomed, and the winning party is just going to continue to win, and it's political realignment. And I mean, in 2004, we had, Democrats can't compete on national security. And then in 06 and 08, they win huge victories on an anti-war message. Then Obama could never be defeated. And in 2010, you get the Tea Party election. After 2012, Obama's reelected. And Republicans, if they don't cave on immigration, then they're going to lose Hispanic voters forever, and they'll never win another election. And then Trump wins on build the wall. So I kind of, always try to sort of caution against sort of presentism. And so I guess when you're looking at this, how many things that we're seeing now are definition of a more fundamental seismic long-term shift in the American electorate versus just like Biden messed up, now we're going to give Trump a shot again, and maybe if Trump messes up, they'll be fine voting for Gavin Newsom or whoever in 4 years.
Okay, so first of all, I should point out that when Governor Phil calls us contemporaries, Phil and I are actually both 25 years old. It's just that rooting for the Jets ages you, like Donovan at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. No, Phil and I are old enough to remember the Newsweek cover in 2009, "We are all socialists now." And you remember how that worked out. 2018, Jack Dorsey, who used to own Twitter, liked and shared an article that made the argument that California, circa 2018, was America's future, and that we were destined to become a one-party state in which our politics would primarily be dominated between centrist Democrats and leftist Democrats, and even further to the left Democrats. Speaking of which, when they say security concerns have shut down the Schumer book tour, it's because AOC is Knives Out. But so, like, all of this talk of, Democrats are, this is it, this is the turning point in history. I'm thinking of that old SNL sketch about NPR. Good times, good times. Because the pendulum always swings back. And maybe it may be that for the last 20 years from now, our politics have been driven by an endless cycle of somebody winning a mandate, and then, like, within 2 years, the American public saying, "Oh my God, we didn't want this at all. What is he doing? I didn't, But that's what it's been. That's why midterms have generally been bad. You can make the argument that 2018 was something of an exception to this process because Republicans gained 2 seats in the Senate. It was mostly the map. Democrats got the House. 2022, Republicans won the House by a very small margin. I think you probably should not nominate nut jobs, and that generally you'll do better. And I could see 2026. I know we're all here dying to know how the next election cycle is going to go. The closeness of the House, it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Democrats took it. I think in the Senate, it's now not crazy to think Republicans either keep it or maybe even gain seats because they've had a bunch of retirements in purplish to blue states, Michigan, New Hampshire, and Minnesota? Tennessee, yeah. Like, none of them are easy states. And unfortunately for Republicans, Tim Walz says he's not running for the Senate. Tim Walz, who now runs around saying, "When I need to feel good, I look at my phone and I look at my Tesla stock." Yes, an American stock that's losing, American stock going down. That's a great one. So my sense is that you could have a Republican Senate for the entirety of the Trump presidency. And if that's the case, there are going to be a whole lot of the judges that we like. And that will create I was going to say bulwark, but that word just doesn't mean what it used to, if you catch my drift. It's going to build a firewall against what the left can do for conceivably the next generation. I, like everyone else, hope that Scalia and Alito live to be 100 and stay on the court for as long as they like. But if they choose to retire when there's a Republican Senate and Trump appoints good judges and they get confirmed by a Republican Senate, he would be the first president since Eisenhower. What? Clarence Thomas. Alito, and who did I say? Scalia? Look, they're so ideologically simpatico. The spirit of Scalia lives on in Thomas.
There we go.
I wish he was still here too.
Yeah. Conceivably, Trump could appoint 5 Supreme Court justices. And you want to talk about having a legacy that will go on for a generation. So, that would be a serious roadblock to what the left could do. But my sense is at some point, Trump and the Republicans will do things that the public will sour on. It looked like the economy was going to be that. Now, I want to take a quick temperature of the room. How many people had eggs for breakfast this morning? You're all being very healthy, good cholesterol. But it felt good, didn't it, right? Eggs have come down in the last couple of weeks, and that had been the stick that the media and Democrats were hitting them with. But my guess at some point, maybe because of tariffs, at some point we're going to hit economic, rough waters. Things will get bad. People will get cranky with the incumbent party. Democrats will win again someday. I don't know how much it'll be. There are no permanent victories in politics as much as everyone likes to pretend they are whenever they're on top.
Now, Caroline, one of the topics that was sort of a big issue has been this whole backlash against wokeism. And after the election, we've seen not just Trump's executive orders, but a lot of companies sort of taking, backing off the wokeness. I feel like maybe the Bud Light controversy will end up being looked back upon as sort of a pivot point away from kind of corporate wokeism. How permanent do you think that shift is? Or do you think in 5 or 10 years, we're going to shift back again toward a renewed wokeism?
Well, I think a lot of these companies could be divided into 2 categories. There's the activist companies that genuinely have identity politics zealots in their C-suites. And then there's the rest of them, which I think is the majority, that are just playing to get along. And I do think that they were taking cues from the Biden administration. And before that, it was, the wheels set in motion, the Obama administration, that they should implement this sort of, not just ESG, but these quotas and this DEI framework because it would make them more competitive, or at least it would kind of get the progressive administration off their back. So I do think, though, that the demand for a, kind of racially blind or just identity politics blind corporate structure is very high. And I also just wanted to make a note. There's one group that I think has overwhelmingly rejected, or at least significantly rejected, DEI and gender ideology in a way that I still think is being somewhat underreported, which is Gen Z. Gen Z, those who are coming of age, they're in their 20s right now. They were in college, maybe they were freshmen when Trump first got elected I was in 2016. And we saw how wokeness just had a chokehold on not only academia, but all these other institutions. And I saw recent data from February. Young men are among the most optimistic groups in America right now. They have a very positive mindset on this country. And this is the group that we were told was struggling with mental health and suicidal ideation, and they felt disenfranchised, and they felt like they were being, cornered out of the job market. And this was a very miserable group, young men. And they are very bullish about the future. And my guess, a big part of that is because of the rollback of DEI and gender ideology in government, and by extension, a lot of these companies. So now young men feel like they can be competitive. They can run as fast as they can, and the implicit assumption is not that they are toxic or that they should be kind of take a back seat and restrain themselves in their, and that goes so far culturally. I think there was this really ugly cloud over Gen Z women and men, especially in dating relations, but men kind of felt like they had to suppress their inner demons all the time, and at least that was the vibe I got from just being a part of Gen Z and hearing from Gen Z. And so yeah, I think wokeness ending it could have a permanent effect, because a big part of this coalition are the young people. They are the future generation, and Gen Z, there is a palpable vibe shift among them. And I mean, it used to be cool to be pessimistic and unpatriotic about this country. Now it seems to be completely the opposite. So there's something in the air, and I would like to think that if this Gen Z can carry this attitude for the future decades, then wokeness will not recover itself in quite the same way as it did.
So we're about to go to questions, but Audrey, if you could just weigh in, do you think that we should expect a sort of Democrats to get off the mats and make a comeback in 2026, or do you think that their problems are deeper?
I think that Jim is probably right. In the Senate, I don't see Democrats having some big sweep. I mean, if you look at the Republicans who are up for re-election, Tom Tillis, he's vulnerable. He'll probably get a big primary challenge. John Cornyn, I'm sure Ken Paxton will challenge him in Texas, but again, not a blue state, even though reporters love to pretend that it is every time there's a competitive Senate election there. And Susan Collins in Maine, who I don't imagine any of these folks losing. I think in the House, it's common for the party to swing, like Jim was saying. It's been really interesting to watch how over the past several decades, the number of crossover districts in the House has shrunk dramatically. It's kind of stunning. If you look at the data, I think now, this past election, there were only 3 House Republicans who carried districts that Kamala Harris won. And I think there are about 13 Democrats who are in Trump districts. So the number of seats that parties are fighting over has shrunk dramatically. I wouldn't be surprised if Democrats won the House. One thing that the White House is focused on is preventing another impeachment. That's something that they're concerned about if Democrats do retake the House. Not that there would be a conviction in the Senate. But look, like I was saying earlier, I do think that Democrats really need to focus on their working class outreach. They're so obsessed with Musk, like Caroline was discussing earlier. We'll see if that message pays off. I imagine we're going to see 1 trillion ads with a bunch of power tools that Elon Musk is taking to the federal bureaucracy, whether it's a chainsaw or sledgehammer or axe or whatever it is. They're going to probably continue to lean into that. But yeah, we'll see.
Okay, thank you. And I understand we have some questions.
All right, thanks, Phil. We have a question here. Tariffs are not conventionally conservative. Will they harm Republicans politically?
Well, I alluded to it earlier. Not looking great, is it? I think the other part of the problem is that when you ask Trump, why are we enacting these tariffs, you'll get a different answer on Monday than you do on Tuesday than you do on Wednesday. And I think some arguments are stronger than others. I think the argument against China, for example, it's much easier to justify on national security reasons and the idea of not wanting to be dependent upon them for anything from used in our defense industrial base or, say, prescription medicine or medical supplies. You may recall about 5 years ago, we suddenly started buying a lot of protective equipment from China for no good reason, for no particular reason. It just kind of happened. On Canada, God, if we could just get Trump to be half as tough on Putin as he is on Justin Trudeau. I don't know if people get that. And you're already seeing instant effects on electricity prices in certain parts of New York State. And a good portion of the fuel oil that goes to refineries in the Midwest comes from Canada. I know the tariff on Canadian oil is only 10% compared to 25%, but it makes stuff more expensive. And when inflation was just the stake that got driven into the heart of the Biden administration, I think I'd be very touchy about rising prices if I were a new president. So we'll see how things go. There's a lot of road between now and the midterms. So if you're going to make bad decisions that backfire, you probably want to do it as early in this term as possible.
I think I probably agree with Jim there. I do think that they will probably hurt Republicans, particularly considering they keep whipsawing back and forth, and the unpredictability is a little bit unsettling to voters probably. You know, since I was discussing midterm ads, I'm expecting we'll see a lot of ads. You know, Trump promised to keep, you know, to bring prices down, but your egg prices are still up and your stock portfolio tanked. So I'd expect to see a lot of that. But one other quick thing, we didn't discuss reconciliation this year. I mean, on the economic agenda, expect House Republicans and Senate Republicans to get in, you know, intense legislative mode soon, because they really see reinstating the 2017 tax cut legislation, making sure that those don't expire, as a really key part of the Trump agenda. And they see that as key to keeping the House and Senate.
I'll just say quickly, I think the American people would understand the trade war. They might have a tolerance for it if the messaging of why is communicated very well. To Jim's point, I just think for Canada, it's a really hard case to make. They're not the main culprit of the fentanyl crisis. They're a longtime ally and trading partner. You know, we share that border. It's just like, it's less compelling than China, which I think there's a very even strong, you know, traditional conservative take on that, which is that, you know, we need to confront their predatory trade practices head on, and they're fundamentally not a free country, so, you know, it's not really like we're even engaging in free trade now. That being said, you know, when it comes to the market stabilizing, I do think that's important, and you know, 62% of Americans own stocks. I was on Mornings with Maria on Fox Business last week, and the CEO of Goldman Sachs, David Solomon, he actually told her that, look, a lot of these companies have actually already baked in the tariffs, so it's not that this is a shock necessarily to our businesses in the way that you would think. We kind of anticipated this, and as we know, companies are less spooked by tariffs themselves so much as they are the uncertainty of tariffs. So that's what, you know, the head of a major financial firm said. So let's hope that, you know, the market fluctuations don't come back. I think we're in a bear market now. Let's hope that doesn't continue. But it'd be one thing if Trump had a 20 years, but he has 4, right? It's a very short time frame to implement this agenda. And while I agree that it's important to our national security to bring domestic manufacturing back and supply chains back, just because like some industrial bases are really important for us to you know, nurture here, I just don't think he has a really long time horizon for that. And the short-term pain for long-term gain, that might just be too much for the American people to stomach.
Okay. Next question.
Audrey, you were recently on Air Force One with President Trump. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. It was a blast. I had so much fun. So as you all know, the White House press pool, the White House has changed the White House press pool, the traveling pool, to have a new media seat. So I was invited to sit in the new media seat, which is hilarious given we were founded in 1955, but you know, hey, I didn't ask any questions, right? I was happy to be on the plane.
Newer media.
Right,
Newer.
right. I was surprised it was a very collegial group of folks in the traveling press pool. So you have your print reporters, which no longer includes AP, even though throughout the weekend when we were kind of holding court at a local library, the AP made sure to drop by donuts and cakes so that the rest of the press pool wouldn't forget about them. But yeah, it was just really cool being on the plane, boarding the plane the same area where Susie Wiles and Chris Acevita and other Trump advisors board the plane. And there's a lot of exhilaration as you're waiting on the tarmac to see if President Trump will come out and speak to you. So, when we were first waiting, we're all shouting our questions, and then he goes up, and then we're waiting on the plane ride. We're all eating our food, but we're worried that he's going to come back, and then he doesn't. And then on the tarmac, he doesn't. And the whole trip, everyone's saying he's not going to talk to us. It's like, guys, I got a feeling he's going to talk to us. And lo and behold, on the way home, he did speak to us mid-flight, and it was a really, really cool experience. And it just also underscored the reality that we now have a president who, love him or hate him, is much more accessible to the media, which is a good thing, and which the mainstream media should be celebrating, just because Joe Biden was so inaccessible. I talked to some longtime White House press pullers, and they said, Joe Biden would never come back and speak to us on the plane, ever. Or on the tarmac, he'd take one question and shout one answer in response. So that is a good thing that we have a president who's more willing to engage with the press.
Okay, in less than 18 months from now, the 2028 presidential campaigns will start. Who are your front runners for both parties?
A timely question. I like how there's nobody in the audience with a microphone, so it's like we're getting the questions from God.
Yeah, I don't know where to look.
Lord God, creator of the universe, special caller, you're on line 1. What is your request today? So I touched on this a little bit in today's morning jolt. It's Republican side. It's J.D. Vance's until either he has some falling out with Trump or somebody else comes along and takes it from him. And I think that right now those are pretty steep odds, but obviously there's a lot of road between now and then. I'm going to shock everybody with my Democratic prediction. And if I'm wrong, I will deny. Everyone watching this on C-SPAN, is it C-SPAN or C-SPAN 2? The Deuce? Anyway, delete this if I end up being wrong. In the last 3 months, we have seen fairly glowing profiles in the New York Times, Atlantic Magazine, a Washington Post columnist who shall remain nameless because I don't pick fights with my coworkers, and NBC, all talking about how Chris Murphy, the Democratic senator from Connecticut, has the bold ideas and the clear vision to lead the Democratic Party. Now, I know he seems like the Temu brand, Gavin Newsom, and you're probably very underwhelmed, but those articles don't just appear out of nowhere. When you see it happening in that many publications that are a big deal in Democratic circles, that's a sign that Chris Murphy wants it, that he's calling in his favors, he's cashing in his chits. His chits with a CH, by the way, cashing in his chits. I know the casino's right around the corner here, that he wants it very badly, and I think, ask Beto O'Rourke how much glowing press coverage can help you. But at the same time, that's almost a prerequisite if you want to get taken seriously as a Democratic presidential. So he's kind of like my dark horse candidate of a guy who's going to be campaigning very hard between now and, oh dear God, 2028.
Chris Murphy wants it really badly. Yeah. If you look at his Twitter profile, he's just constantly putting out videos and videos and videos. I think Pete Buttigieg will probably run. Sorry, it's hard for me to say that name. He just ruled out a Michigan Senate run. I think people like Gavin Newsom and Josh Shapiro may have the peak too early problem, but I think they will probably run. And we'll probably see several other senators. Jim's right about J.D. Vance. I think he's clearly the front runner now. But 4 years is a long time. It's a century in politics, so who knows what happens in this administration. I think that Glenn Youngkin is probably going to run. I'd be very surprised if he didn't. And then I'm sure that we're going to see a couple Republican senators and maybe some cabinet secretaries throw their hat in the ring as well.
I'm not going to go with the knockoff, the dupe Chris Murphy. I'm going to go with the real deal, Gavin Newsom, which is, I think, obvious to a lot of people now. But I was talking to our colleague Noah Rothman yesterday, and I used a Gen Z slang term, Riz. The man has Riz, and it's undeniable. It's just short for charisma. And even the way he talks with his hands, I'm like mesmerized by it. I don't know how to explain it. And you could argue Trump had a degree of that Riz, quite a bit. I think Gavin Newsom will be a formidable force, regrettably, because of that charisma and his communication style. That being said, he's very inauthentic, but that didn't seem to be disqualifying to Democrats when they hand-selected Kamala Harris in their coup d'etat, because she's the least authentic person, on the political scene. So I do think they probably will find Newsom to be a competitive candidate. Even though he's a political chameleon, he just goes where the wind blows. That's why he had Charlie Kirk on his podcast and appeared to concede on every single thing Charlie Kirk brought up, which, even though he still governs like a communist, so he's just trying to, play it both ways. And then I think J.D. Vance is the natural heir to Trump. I think he's being set up for this role. He's an incredible communicator. I think that debate performance, with Margaret Brennan, all of them, I think he blew it out of the water. So I think he's the triple threat, I think, in politics that maybe we've been looking for a while.
If there's any lesson you can take from 2024, is that the electorate loves inauthentic Californians. And to quote our colleague Jeff Blahar, the problem with Gavin Newsom is that every single picture he's in, my hair is fairly slicked back today, so I'm prepared to do the impression. He always looks like I'm going to destroy you once and for all, RoboCop.
He feels like a Disney villain to me. Like when I think of Jack Frost, I'm like, Gavin Newsom, like something icy about him, but yeah, anyway, very Hollywood.
It seems like Newsom has the quality of just being shameless and incapable of being embarrassed by doing anything. And that's an
That's a
asset
superpower, yeah.
in politics. This has been a great discussion, but it's time to wrap up to keep the program running. Thank you to all our panelists, and thanks again to the Spencers for their support of this conversation.
Oh, to a group real quick. You want a standing or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting our next panel soon.
He's hit with crises every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin the next session in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin the next session in 2 minutes. Please welcome Thérèse Shaheen.
Good morning. Whoa, I'm mic'd. Oh, hi. Good morning. We are at war with the People's Republic of China. I'm not trying to be glib, but we are in the war that they want us to be in, and only the war they want us to be in. And because we're in the war that they want us to be in, it's not working to our advantage. My name is Thérèse Shaheen. I was formerly the chairman and managing director of the American Institute in Taiwan, which means I was the senior State Department liaison to Taiwan. Prior to that, I did 10 years in China doing mergers and acquisitions work in high technology. And after that, I've been working on the 4 pillars of Chinese economic decline, which are demography, debt, excess capacity, and environmental degradation. Fortunately, we have with us today Admiral Philip Scott Davidson, who will address my pronouncement that we're at war with China. The commander of Indo-Pacific is the largest of all the US military commands. It starts way up in the Arctic, in the Bering Sea in Alaska, obviously encompass the entire Pacific Ocean, the Indian Ocean, and down to Antarctica. It covers 2/3 of the world's population, and Admiral Davidson had almost 400,000 troops under his command. 24 of the 26 largest commercial ports in the world are in the Indo-Pacific. 60% of all global trade goes through the Indo-Pacific. Half of all world trade goes through the Indo-Pacific. 63% of the entire world's gross domestic product and 88% of the world's largest ships by tonnage go through the Taiwan Strait. Now, recently on the Hill, with all these hearings, they have stated and restated that if China were to achieve hegemony in the Indo-Pacific, that this would be an existential threat to the United States. I agree. But they've also been saying that if Taiwan were to be absorbed, coerced to being absorbed into China, that this would not be an existential threat to the United States. I believe these are two contradictory statements. Now, Taiwan produces 90% of the world's advanced semiconductors, the central nervous system of the advanced technology economy. It consistently ranks in the top 20 of all economies in the world. It's a thriving democracy. China is a totalitarian surveillance state. It's a vital commercial and defense vector for our treaty allies, Japan and South Korea. It's also been said on the Hill recently that we are not ready to fight a war with China, and that somehow the strategic balance has shifted in China's favor. Admiral Davidson will address these two comments. But what I think is really not understood is that China is terrified to fight a war at scale with the United States, and that they are playing a high-stakes game of chicken, hoping we will back down. And it's we that have drunk their Kool-Aid. Now, in the last month, China has done live fire exercises all around circumnavigated Australia, giving Australia no notice. 50 commercial airliners had to be rerouted in order to avoid some kind of accident. You can imagine. They did this off the coast of New Zealand and in the last 10 days off the coast of Vietnam. This is how they mark their territory in the new Chinese war. They're the big dog in the region. Now, China shows it doesn't want a hot war with the United States. It does this by using schoolboy tactics. It bullies, it shoves, it makes its way around, it buzzes aircraft, it rams other boats in the region, it eggs houses, it acts like adolescent schoolboys on Devil's Nights. It sneaks around. 15 years ago, buoys in the Philippine Sea turned into fishing huts on coral reefs that turned into eventually $50 billion worth of military installations. Oops, Pinocchio. Those are now Chinese territory. the most frightening Devil's Night costume that the Chinese wear is the threat of an amphibious invasion on Taiwan. But this is, again, a Halloween trick. An amphibious invasion of Taiwan would make the Normandy invasion look like a picnic. I'm not trying to underestimate Chinese military modernization. But the Taiwanese terrain is very treacherous. It's got a long coastline. But here's the catch, okay? If you don't plan for a Chinese invasion, then a Chinese invasion won't be deterred. So it's a catch-22. But make no mistake, their intention is to intimidate and coerce Taiwan to acquiescing China's demand, and that's their plan A, that's their plan B, that's their plan C, and that's their plan D. They're trying to wear the region down psychologically into accepting this is a fait accompli. They act like gangs, and they choose an easy mark. That doesn't mean in this war that there won't be skirmishes. It's amazing no one's gotten killed in the last 20 years since this has been going on. But somebody might be killed. Because so much of what they've done in the region has been dangerous. All this buzzing and ramming of boats. So Tony and Bernardo might get killed in this gang war. But mainly, they choose a weak sister going down a dark alley. A couple of years ago at the Oscars, a composed Chris Rock got smacked. Would that have happened if it had been Dwayne "The Rock"? China is deterring us. So says Admiral Phil Davidson. And so, without further ado, I give you Admiral Davidson. Admiral Davidson?
Thank you, Therese. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Admiral Davidson, so what do you say?
What do you say? There's no doubt about it that the Chinese are trying to deter the United States to achieve their objectives in the region. We have to remember that Taiwan is not the conclusion or the completion of their strategy. Their strategy is to supplant the United States leadership role in the international order. However you think about that, it's about U.S. global leadership on the planet. That is their objective. And they have long said, and they've told us outright, and they've certainly told all our allies, partners, and others in the region that they intend to do that by 2050. I'm somewhat, there's been a phrase attributed to me over the last few years called the Davidson window, which was an answer to a question at Senate testimony about giving the alarming activities China was conducting in the region, many of them deterrent activities, and I'll get back to that. Given those alarming activities, what do I think about any potential conflict? That's the key quote in the region. And I said, I think the threat is manifest this decade, And I was particularly worried about the next 6 years, the time between then and the potential next election period in 2028 in China. And lost in that, of course, that tight answer to a Senate question is the total thesis. And the thesis is, that's not the strategy they actually have in execution, that they would come and attack Taiwan or us or others. But they will use their entirety of their national power, in an economic sense, in a diplomatic sense, in a military sense, and all the sub-elements that go in that to undermine the United States, give the impression that we're on the decline and that they're on the ascent, and displace our influence and our role economically, diplomatically, militarily, security-wise, in the region. That is indeed the strategy and execution. Thérèse mentioned Taiwan, and why is that critical in the debate on this? In the evolution of this strategy, China made clear that they were going to try to resolve their internal security concerns first, and that's a key phrase, right? And if you look backwards, which I was doing in 2021 when I was asked this question, when you look backwards and you start to add up Tibet, Xinjiang and the Uyghurs, the clash with the Indians on the line of actual control, the envelopment of the South China Sea with military installations and their outrageous international sea claims, or territorial sea claims, excuse me. Hong Kong in 2018 and 2019, which was a galvanizing event across the whole of the region. Taiwan is part of that next step in that evolution of resolving what the Communist Party of China considers their internal security concerns. We need to step up our game. During my time in command, I had a strategy that I developed called Regain the Advantage. My successor, Admiral Aquilino, very properly, advanced that further. And Admiral Paparo, now in office out there in command, in Indo-Pacific, has his own evolution of this. But that strategy was designed to motivate and inspire a whole-of-government deterrence strategy to counter the Communist Party of China's influence in the region. So we need to step up our deterrent game. And one of the things that came up frequently in my time in command, do we need more Mandarin speakers? Do we need deeper expertise in China history? Yes, of course. But the real thing we need is a return to a deterrent strategy, an increase in the expertise in the art of deterrence, much of which has been lost since the end of the Cold War and transformed in a sense that our coin and constabulary era over the last 20 years morphed it. But we actually need to use all elements of our national power. And deterrence is measured in three big bins. Capability. What is the quality of what America brings to the problem, right? And I mean that absolutely in a military sense. What is the quality of our ships, aircraft, troops, et cetera? It's also in capacity, that is quantity, right? What is the number of ships and aircraft and things like that? And you can extend all this to our economic power, our diplomatic reach, our intelligence reach, and things like that. And of course, the third important point of it is our will. And that's not just what we say and what we do, but it's the confidence that we bring to the table. Those three things need to be stepped up in order to counter China's influence in the region, knock them off their internal strategic mandate, and sustain our influence and opportunity in the region, because that is indeed what it is about. Our security and our prosperity is indelibly linked to the Indo-Pacific. 2/3 of the world's population and 2/3 of the global economy is going to be centered in East Asia by 2030. Were there to be an upset in the security arrangements in the region, led by the United States, and that is manifest in Taiwan, all of our allies and partners in the region would come to question their security relationship with the United States. I was told outright by leaders of our friendliest nations in the Asia-Pacific that they would have to reconsider their security relationship with the United States, consider a security relationship with China, and that would put China in the driver's seat. That would enable them to dictate not only the security concerns in the region, but the interactions with the United States, and that would include our economy. I don't think we want that to go backwards. The safety and security and future of Taiwan, the status quo vis-a-vis Taiwan, is in our interest.
Well, I mean, see, the impression that many people in the region have is this: China has this specter, and what a totalitarian state, what a command and control state is good at is propaganda.
Yes.
And we're, and an open society is not so good at propaganda. And I've seen them do this in other realms, which is why I mentioned I was doing all this work on their economy, and they've blarneyed everybody for the last 20 years about the state of their economy.
Yes.
And they're doing this now on their military posture.
Yes.
So when you talk about the Davidson window, which of course Admiral Davidson is very famous about this, about that they want to make sure that Taiwan is reabsorbed in this next time period. Mm-hmm. What's our counter to that? I mean, how do we, without being a command and control economy, which is we're gonna blast out propaganda, how do we project ourselves? Is there any way we can counter that impression?
Yeah, well, we have to recognize all the elements of what they're doing to counter our influence in the region. You mentioned misinformation and propaganda. That's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And there are Chinese-based, bots, Chinese-fronted bots and other influence materials that are doing everything they can in social media to undermine our citizens' confidence in their political leadership, in their military leadership, in their business leadership. And they take advantage of accidents and memes that begin, serious memes that begin, in order to exploit that. They flood into diplomatic engagements with ambassadors and leaders of other countries on the backside of opportunities that they see to poison the well, whether it's visits that we're doing in said country or whether it's something else happening globally, to poison the well with them. In fact, we get a lot of our information from that. That's one area, not the main area, but it's one area in which we need to step up our game. One, to defend, two, to make sure we're not being totally taken advantage of in that environment. We have to strengthen our allies and partners in the region. I was just having a conversation backstage. What do our allies bring to the problem? We have 5 of the nation's, 7 alliances on the planet. 5 of them are in the Indo-Pacific, right? Japan, Korea, Philippines, Australia, and Thailand. And, we have the AUKUS agreement with Australia. That is not a welfare program for Australia. They have already ponied up money with a B behind it, billions, in order to put themselves on a trajectory towards nuclear capability, which they need. And we can talk about the circumnavigation in a bit. But in order to invest in nuclear submarines, amen to that. We have to recognize what Japan brings to the problem. You know, Japan is a nation of 130-odd million people. They do technological development. They have an economic technological relationship with the United States, almost like no other. They've developed things in their military. They use US technology, the Aegis weapon system on their ships, like our ships. They fly the F-35. We've been in co-development on missile defense for a dozen years with them, and we actually conduct missile defense exercises together. A really, really strong capability. And oh, by the way, they bring capacity too. That's 100 ships. The Japanese have been holding off the Chinese for 14 centuries. We want them on our side. So the Philippines, 7,000 islands, over 50,000 US veterans living in the Philippines today. A people-to-people relationship with a Filipino diaspora, you know, especially in the Western United States, Hawaii, in the Philippines, Philippine Americans, that's unmatched, that has survived the toughest political strains of this century. Great relationships with the Filipinos. The Koreans, long-term, you know, defensive capability that we spent. They also operate the Aegis system, frontline troops, staring down the North Koreans. You know, we have to be interested in strengthening our alliances and partnerships. There is, you know, certainly assisting Taiwan is in this, you know, steady foreign military sales. It's been disrupted a lot over the last 15 years or so. That is not to say, however, that Taiwan does not need to invest in their own defense. They need desperately to invest in their own defense. Any number moving north is important. I don't think Bridge Colby's call for a 10% commitment of GDP is inappropriate in this regard.
You think 10% is not inappropriate? It's not too high?
No, I mean, they need to set a stretch goal and start moving towards it. That said, there's a lot happening in Taiwan that people aren't necessarily aware of. Certainly in terms of their infrastructure, power generation, how it's distributed, things like that. They're making some vast improvements in deep strategic needs that people aren't necessarily aware of in the West. I think that's critically important. Some of the nation's replicator initiative to help deliver more asymmetric capability to Taiwan, I think that's important. It's not all about that. If you're watching Russia-Ukraine, and I'm sure everyone is, there's been a lot of talk about drones and loitering munitions and how they're revolutionizing the battlefield. It's more of an evolution. One of the things that's going on is you have a near stalemate there. You know, why is that? They have not been able to tactically exploit the capabilities that the intelligence brings from drones and the fires bring in loitering munitions with maneuver, which is a more conventional capability, motorized, mechanized, airborne, that kind of thing, in order to change what's happening along the lines profoundly. Taiwan still needs a conventional capability, right? If China is eroding the military norms in and around Taiwan by ever-advancing circumnavigations and penetrations by air assets, you know, past the midline, a long historical line in the Taiwan Strait that both sides honored, you know, into the air defense identification zone of Taiwan, which never occurred, you know, 12, 15 years ago, and now is happening at a rate that's exponentially greater than when I was in command. The circumnavigations with ships, the quarantine rehearsals, the blockade rehearsals, these all require Taiwan to respond with conventional assets, right? Ships and submarines and aircraft in order to defend themselves on a day-to-day basis. If that capability erodes because they haven't invested and we haven't helped with ships and airplanes and missile defense and all that other kind of stuff, that stuff is going to start to break down because they are getting stressed more and more and more. And when you look back to the turn of the century between Taiwan and China, Taiwan had more capability, better quality, more capacity, more ships and aircraft than China did at the start of the century. And that's now gone like this. And they have to be able to have that conventional capability, the maneuver elements, the protection and sustainment and logistics support, the intelligence, the information understanding, all those elements to go with the maneuver elements that advances in things like asymmetric capability, like drones and things like that, bring. It's got to be whole. It can't be only.
Okay, so now the statements that several statements I've heard. One is by very senior people that one, China is an ascendant economy, which I think is false. One, that the balance of power have shifted in China's favor, which I would think you think is false, but I'll let you comment on that. And that we're not ready to fight a war with China. I'll let you comment on that, but assuming you think that's false, how is it that senior policymakers would have that impression? That's my concern about the propaganda is seeped into the highest levels of our government. What is your comment about that?
One of the things I used to complain about when I was in command, and I was in command from 2018 to 2021, was the language of miscalculation, right?
Okay.
There was always, whenever we were conducting a freedom of navigation operations, or one of our reconnaissance assets were close to a Chinese assets, you would hear this burble from all across Washington, the blogs, everything from the blog set to the political set about, oh my God, we can't have a miscalculation because it might result in World War III. Wait a second. So, first, where are they getting that? That's China engaging all of our allies and partners about the routine things that we have done in the region going back to the end of World War II, and giving the impression that somehow now we're the interloper in the region and conducting dangerous activities. It's an outright falsehood. Secondly, one only need to look at our 40-year Cold War, with the Soviets to understand that no accident at sea resulted in World War III at that time, right? I know the conduct of our troops, professional, safe. I observe the conduct of China's tactical troops in the region. And in fact, the Pentagon very carefully maps and charts what is unprofessional and what is unsafe conduct by them, by China. And they are by far the worst committers of it. That said, 98%, the vast majority of the interactions in the tactical sense between the United States and China, whether it's air to air or ship to ship, are professional and safe. It is not that dangerous an environment. But the language of miscalculation became part of the mainstream here in Washington and across the United States, and it was really sourced from China. It drove me crazy. So the same thing can be extended to your question, which is, China's on the ascent and America's on the descent. Listen, we still have the most powerful economy on the planet. Yes, we're not building as many ships right now as China is, but we build the best aircraft carriers, the best submarines, the best destroyers of any nation on the planet, by far. You have destroyers today that can shoot a missile with a missile in space. When I think back 70 years to World War II capability, and a destroyer could shoot as far as its eye could see on the horizon, which was 13 miles, that is an incredible leap in evolutionary capability, right? Our ships have operated mines, torpedoes, sonobuoys, missiles, Tomahawk missiles. These are drones. These are loitering munitions. We've been operating them for 150 years. We know what they do. We know how to command and control them. We know how to integrate those fires and sensors into our maneuver, our logistics, our sustainment. All very, very powerful. Where China's made a difference over the last 20 years, and they are improving their capability, there's no doubt about it, is in capacity, right? Shipbuilding is on everyone's minds these days. Their single largest yard that produces their ships, aircraft, including their aircraft carriers, is bigger than our 7 shipbuilding yards combined. It's an incredible set of capacity. Improving that in the United States is a function of contracting and craftsmen and workers. It's not a function of necessarily that we need a different set of infrastructure. We need to get after that problem, there's no doubt about it. Our diplomatic relationships, economic, security, diplomatic, ticking through them all, our diplomatic relationships are still incredibly strong. You really have to hand it to now the last 3 administrations. We have deepened our relationship in our alliances with our Indo-Pacific. We survived a very difficult political time with the Philippines. The national security announcements that Japan made in January of 22 and the US-Japan alliance announcements that were made in, that was December of 22. The advancements that the US and Japan made in our alliance agreements in January of 2023 were profound. Japan is doubling their investment in their defense budget from 1% of GDP to 2% of GDP by 2027, and they have markers to do it between 2022 when they announced and now, and they are on track to do that. May have to be more when they get to 2027 and beyond, but they've recognized that. They've made a phenomenal number of changes in their own posture across Japan. A lot of development in the Southwest Islands, which are along the East China Sea and nearest to Taiwan. They're creating cyber and space forces. They've adopted cybersecurity practices. We've deepened the economic and technological relationship we have with the Japanese. This is a profound change that we need to leverage. There's AUKUS with Australia. There's our consistent commitment to Korea. These things are all going to derive benefits over time vis-a-vis China.
Okay, question. This statement or these assertions that we could lose Taiwan but still not lose hegemony over the Indo-Pacific without sans Taiwan. What do you say to this assertion?
Well, it goes back pretty much to what I said in the introduction here is, Taiwan is what the Communist Party of China considers an internal security concern. That's why they're always calling it core interest. For many of our allies and partners in the region, they have viewed the Taiwan Relations Act and our longstanding relationship with Taiwan as, the critical milestone flag that they're observing to understand our commitment and reliability in the region. If indeed our core interest is our access and influence in the Indo-Pacific, that is undermined, really, the keystone in the arch of our economic and security influence in the region is indeed Taiwan.
So that's it?
Yeah.
In other words, Taiwan gone, bye-bye.
Yeah, it's our allies and partners and all others. And in all others categories, there's plenty that are hedging or have already fallen under China's influence.
Yeah.
Through, the development of exclusive or free economic zones.
Yeah.
In Laos, that's one
right.
that allows China to provide, not only, conduct their own economic development for their benefit, but provide
right.
their own security and things like that. It's unheard of.
Yeah.
There's plenty in that other category or partner category that are in that category or hedging. But I mean, I have heard from allies, our closest friends, that they'd really have to reconsider the security relationship with the United States and consider what China's interests were then. And that is not a happy trajectory. And that's why I say it's the keystone in our security architecture.
It's the keystone for our maintaining, for our making sure that China does not achieve hegemony in the Indo-Pacific.
Right.
So what do you think would be the consequences? I mean, Japan getting nukes, South Korea, what would happen if Taiwan was reabsorbed? What do you think the consequences would be here?
Yeah, one of the benefits of serving for almost 40 years in the military is to see many of these conversations take over time in over the span of a career. And the Japanese have annually, checked and probed to make sure they understand the quality and quantity of our extended deterrent, right? The nuclear umbrella that we extend to Japan's security and Korea's security for that matter. And have always probed to make sure they understand, as the budget has ebbed and flowed in the United States and elections have come and gone, what is the strength of that extended deterrent? If indeed you believe that the keystone in our access to the region is Taiwan in this arc, you would have to think that Japan and Korea would be considering going nuclear on their own. There's no doubt in my mind that they would take a clear-eyed view of what their strategic environment looks like, assess what they believe our reliability is, and make a decision based on their own interests. That would be a tough spot for the United States to be in. Makes the security of the region much, much more complex and could ultimately lead to deeper isolation for us.
Wow. How do we use the resources we have within the Department of Defense and the U.S. budget to reconfigure resources short of the time span we need to get new ships and other assets online?
Yeah. Much of what we're talking about is about money. So there can be money found internal to the Pentagon budget. I mean, when we go back to the post-9/11 era and the COIN, counterinsurgency and constabulary era we conducted in Iraq and Afghanistan and Northeast Africa over the course of 2001 to 2014, we made profound changes in all the services. I mean, the Pentagon basically told the United States Navy and the United States Air Force to take a back seat and flowed an incredible amount of resources into the Army and Marine Corps. And it affected, the capabilities that the Navy and the Air Force had. The Air Force took on a very large drone responsibility. At one time, at the peak of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the United States Navy had more more sailors on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan than we have submariners in the submarine force.
Oh.
That's a profound change. What were they? They were explosive ordnance disposal experts, special operators, all that kind of capability. You shifted with the threats that were there for you. And that was done, with a moderately rising defense budget between 07 and 11 or 12. I'm speaking somewhat off the cuff. Checked up seriously by sequestration in 2013. 2014, 15, 16 budgets are pretty far south. You have to look at what the threats are now to the United States and decide what's important to me. And there is recapitalization and modernization that needs to happen in the United States Navy and the United States Air Force and the Space Forces in order to address concerns here in the region. I also agree with Senator Wicker's point, there's probably got to be more money that goes into this as well. If you want to address quantity in shipbuilding, it is going to be about contracting. The way the money flows should be differentiated a little bit so that we can get the craftsmen that we need at the inflationary rates that have developed over the last 5 years. Our shipbuilders are different than they were before 2013. It's a much more mobile force that's coming in and out of the industry at a much lower level of experience that needs to be addressed with technology, with proper wages, with all those kind of things. We have the infrastructure. We need the people. We have to get after that. You know, some of that is going to have to be modified. So not all of defense is about transformational technology. Some of it is transformational contracting and processes, you know, internal to the defense budget to get it. But, you know, I applaud the effort to take a look at, see if there's 5 or 8% of monies that could be kind of redistributed. But I also think it's going to take some more on top to get after this problem and make sure that we have the kind of, again, capability, capacity, and demonstrated will in the theater to have a successful deterrent ourselves.
So, you agree this is a war of coercion and intimidation, but if we had to, we could beat the pants off them.
Certainly
right,
in the
Admiral?
nearest term. Certainly in this nearest term, and I know Admiral Paparo feels that way. I hope everybody saw the 60 Minutes interview where he said, "It's not my hope, it's my duty." Very committed individual. I have the highest confidence in the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Forces. Maybe I made mention this at the beginning. You know, your Navy, as you know, I'm a former admiral. I get to advocate for the Navy. Your Navy has been operating in the Red Sea for 19 months in combat conditions. It was said, I think by the White House or the Pentagon just the other day, there have been 170 odd attacks, cruise missiles, drones, and ballistic missiles against our US Navy forces. 170 odd attacks in the last 19 months. Your Navy has defeated every one of them, or they failed, right? They're doing that with hard kill, kinetic, missile on missile things. And we could talk about the cost trade some other time. They have done it with their terminal defenses, phalanx system. They have done it with their electronic warfare systems, which your Navy is as adept at as any on the planet. Trust me, by far. Their electronic warfare systems are effective as well. That helps our forces hide. It helps our forces deny other enemy fires. It helps our forces project power. Those are the strikes that have been occurring in the last couple of days against the Houthis. Our manipulation of the electromagnetic environment is very, very important, and it's very, very capable. And you have to remember, the Red Sea is a phone booth for an aircraft carrier. When we have the vast expanse of the Philippine Sea, the East China Sea, and the South China Sea, we can hide an aircraft carrier. If we can do it in the Red Sea, we can do it there as well.
Take that, you dirty thieving robbing bastards. Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you. Nice, Grace.
Thank you.
Great pleasure.